Thank you, everyone. I'm Jeff Broberg. Really happy to be here and see all these great presentations today. It's given us a world view of what we're dealing with climate and industry and investment and incentives. I'm going to take a little different track and maybe a little history first. I'm a licensed professional geologist. I worked in the oil field for 10 years. I have guilt. And I moved to Minnesota and started working in landfill cleanup projects. I was a project superintendent, so I have experience building pipelines for landfill gas. So I've come to this then as a consultant. I was an environmental consultant in Rochester for almost 30 years, owned an environmental company dealing with environmental risks. So I come to this from a lot of different professional perspectives. I know the geology, I know the hydrology, I know the construction techniques. And I retired in 2018 from corporate life and transitioned to dedicating my time to nonprofit work to protect water and help start Minnesota Well Owners Organization, an organization that is concerned with ensuring people have safe drinking water at their kitchen sink. We hold water testing clinics across the state. And at one of those clinics 2 years ago, a native friend, this is up on the White Earth Reservation, sent me a paper that was a violation order for Enbridge on an accident they had that ruptured an artesian aquifer. And it was a subject that I was familiar with. I'd done some professional work on artesian aquifers. It's one of the most difficult things to control. It's something that drillers hate. You drill into an artesian aquifer and you're going to be soaking wet day and night until your job is done. The water is very difficult to control. And at Clear Brook, they dug too deep, came too close to the confining layer, and the water burst up onto the ground and created quicksand at the site. It was immediate. It was dangerous. People knew they had to back away, and yet they concealed this from the agencies. They reported it as dewatering difficulty for a site that was losing 2,000 gallons a minute. They had to draw the water table down for months, pumping it so that they could finally dig their pipe in. And when they let the water pressure come back, it just boiled out and spread across the landscape. That really triggered the work that I've done on the pipeline. And I'll talk more about that, but really, I can change the slides here? Yeah. Is that how it goes? Oh, there it is. Okay, good. So, and where do I point that up here? So just, quick agenda. Everyone cares about our water and it connects everything. These are some of the lessons I've really learned dealing with Indigenous people. And it's something that was kind of missing out of my engineering career. It's been an interesting journey, but really it comes down to the questions, are these pipelines safe to build? And what are those risks of the pipelines? So I'm going to go over those things with what we found on Line 3 and deal with some of the construction hazards that occur in this setting. So construction causes irreparable damage. We typically think of explosions and the hazard of pipelines after they're built and after they're commissioned. But think about what's happened here in Line 3, 355 miles across the Laurentian Divide, across the very headwaters of Hudson Bay, the Mississippi River, and the Great Lakes. A trench, a minimum of 8 feet deep, through wetlands, streams, rivers, lakes, across the entire countryside in a swath that was pledged to have no permanent impact. I was incredulous when I read that in the permits. They waived the anti-degradation standard for pollution control permits because the permits were only going to be temporary. You can see these things from outer space that were built 50 years ago. There is a permanent impact. So I want to talk about some of those environmental damages that occur, but it's really starts with the selection of the right-of-way and the areas that define the risk. every area geologic terrain is different. And we have the risks of geology, hydrology, ecology, land use, agronomic interests, land ownership, social and community risks of this corridor that go all the way across broad areas. And we've seen a lot of the details, I'm sorry, of these other pipelines. I'm having trouble with my clicks here, sorry. Slow down or speed up, one or the other. There we go. And the Navigator pipeline canceled, of course, the Summit Midwest constantly under review and consideration, but it's on a fast track. And this is from their website, and it says on the bottom, 2023 start construction, 2024 begin operations, an aggressive schedule with the greenwashing that we've heard about today. I wanted to stress, this is a funky little, I guess I do, huh? I think the important thing to stress is these are dependent on a lot of different factors. If you look at just the watersheds, major watersheds that would be crossed by these carbon pipelines, it goes from the upper Mississippi River Valley into the Minnesota River Valley, the Missouri River Valley. And if you look at the same map overlay of the aquifers, we're in an area where we're affecting multiple aquifers, or in the white area on that map where there are few aquifers, and will have an impact on those water resources. So sites are important, watershed divides are important, the headwaters are some of the most important and most sensitive areas to deal with. The main lesson from line 3, I think we've heard it all before, is water connects everything. Water's life. And when we disturb those resources, it has not only a physical aspect, but a cultural aspect. And when we talk about the permanence of these things, it's important to understand what the issues are. My journey on this really started when we recognized, me and a friend that's a remote sensing specialist, said, you know, things like Clearbrook, we can see those with remote sensing. We can use thermal imaging and fixed wing airplanes. And it's a technology that's well known. It's being advertised even by some of Enbridge's consultants, that you can use satellite data to see these things. Kind of defies the narrative that these are temporary impacts. But we have the tools from space or from fixed wing airplanes to see these permanent changes in the landscape. And that's what we've done with line 3. We got a group of 5 different operations together, raised $54,000, did a high resolution flight of the entire line, 355 miles, so half a mile wide. And we can see both the natural and the unnatural features. But what it brought us to is we did not apply appropriate risk management during the routing, the due diligence, or the review. That we know there's things in pipeline construction that are very likely to happen. And we know that there's things that have severe consequences. And yet our default in the permitting was to say, don't worry, contractors are experienced. They can handle anything. We see that in the permit reports all the time. They say, let's have a standard plate to tell us how to deal with this. And if it happens, we're prepared because we have a plan for it. But they don't define where these things will happen and are unprepared to do the work until it happens. And just like Clearbrook, it's a surprise when the water comes welling up and your work site turns into quicksand. We don't think that's an appropriate approach. So one of the things we've done, and I'll talk about Wadukawad a little more in a minute, but one of the things we've done is taken that thermal data that is so high resolution, 1/4 meter, 1/3 of a degree centigrade in 1/4 meter. We can see the difference in temperature between groundwater at 45 degrees and frozen ground without a doubt. But we thought nobody's going to believe this. We found 45 sites on the pipeline where right in the pipeline trench we have upwelling groundwater. So a small group formed and said, we're going to go and check. we're going to dispatch people to those areas on public land or where we have access and check these sites. And in every one of them, they came to the site with their thermometers and they could see the water upwelling, and we could take water samples and see that it was different than the surrounding waters, and we could see the flow. And we put together now a manual of 10 different construction hazards that we see, and we can count, and they're all predictable. Frackouts, the issue of directional drilling, horizontal directional drilling, is oftentimes drilling 60 feet below. At the Mississippi River 1, the fracking out was a boring 60 feet below the water level. It collapsed from the top, created a bubbling up of the mud while they were drilling. That happened in at least 28 sites. They said in the reports, the engineering reports, they said it's low risk, and even then, contractors know what to do. We can install the pipeline. What they didn't say is they could protect the water. They were efficient, extremely efficient at putting the pipeline in, did it in record time, 300 miles in a year, but they didn't protect our water. French drains are well known. We have areas where you come down a slope into a valley, and the wetlands on top of the slope are being drained by the water that comes down the pipeline corridor itself. And we have good examples and pictures of this where it's occurred on the pipeline. We have subsurface hydraulic barriers. They went to fix one of the sites at LaSalle, and they pumped a cement wall 30 feet tall and 1,000 feet wide to stop the flow that they caused from the removal of sheet piles. And now they blocked the hydrology and have had a permanent disturbance to the ecosystem that's dependent on that groundwater. We have dewatering and compaction. They're out there all summer long, filling in where the trench was, but it happens off the pipeline corridor in the same way because of the removal of the groundwater. And we have year-round soil heating. This is one of the things that surprised us. Every time that pipe is being pushed up a hill, down a hill, or turns a corner, there's a friction that occurs, and we have plant growth all winter long, disturbing those ecosystems forever, changing their winter environment to something that's more akin to spring. And other issues we did not have on line 3 of blasting, but a well-known feature where you blast along a hillside, and then what happens with the water that drains down the hillside in the subsurface, it's captured by that new trench. These are all well-known hazards. They're all mappable, but we have allowed permits to be issued saying, don't worry, folks. We understand these are problems. We have contractors that can take care of these things. This is a picture of our thermal imaging. It only costs $54,000 to do this. We're advocating that the state do it again to confirm what's going on here. We advocate that pipeline routes have this work done beforehand. We want to see this work on line 5 on the carbon capture pipeline at the right time so we can evaluate what the natural condition is of the flow of groundwater out into the surface, into these wetlands, lakes, and streams. And Wadukwad, this is an example of the thermal imaging and the resolution. This was the Fond du Lac Reservoir. The red and yellow colors are the groundwater that's being released from that aquifer at a rate of 2,000 gallons a minute. And we can see the flow path of that water all the way down these lakes and ditches all winter long, keeping that unfrozen. That was the warmest winter that those beavers and muskrats ever realized. They had groundwater all winter long. But that's not what was in the permit. They weren't supposed to have these sorts of damages. So Wadukwad had a group of people, trouble again, that went out and we gave them coordinates, and they went out to these amazing environments that people don't go in the summer. A lot of this work for Enbridge had to be done in the winter on ice roads and board roads. And this group of people went out there with sampling instruments to GPS instruments to find these spots. And in every one of them, we identified on the thermal imaging, we found this upwelling water, upwelling mud, the changes in water chemistry that are coming out of the water onto the surface. And we discovered things like blowouts that haven't been addressed, bottomless holes where the water has upwelled out of the pipe trench, or the remediation sites totally failing, and the differences in the water quality across here. So we have really good confirmed evidence of what's going on. So can we keep our water safe in these environments? We don't think so. We haven't even started to address the impact to drinking water supplies. We see the ecological impacts on these water dependent ecosystems, but we've got to stop talking about it and do something. And what we need is better due diligence. The Corps of Engineers has done a lot of work with pipelines in the Gulf Coast, and they have real specific requirements for horizontal drilling to do borings every 200 feet and to make sure we have all of the data about the groundwater and the groundwater pressures. And we ignored all that advice. And we allowed Enbridge to make their own plans and approve those. They need more borings. They need all of the soils information, the hydrological information, the groundwater information to make these decisions. And we shouldn't be fooled by the permit promises that, oh, we know how to take care of this, we can put in the pipeline. There's no doubt they can do that. They can get the pipeline operational in record time, but we've proven that they can't protect our water. So the thermal imaging has left us, I'm sorry, all of these fingerprints. And just to give you an update of where we've gone with this, Minwoo, a group of people have joined together to intervene in the Enbridge criminal case. A year ago, Enbridge was charged of a misdemeanor of failing to have a water appropriation permit wherever they breached an aquifer. And there was a diversion agreement that said, Enbridge, if you're good for a year, we drop the charges. That hearing was supposed to be a week ago today. We've compiled proof of 8 sites where there's continuing ongoing flow that requires permits and have been ignored by both the state agencies and Enbridge. And we say that's prima facie proof that they violated the law, that those criminal charges should not be dropped. So we have a series of interveners, Minnesota Well Organization, the Defend Water, people from RISE, Indigenous Women's Coalition, and we're going to the court, and we've learned now from the Assistant Attorney General that they intend to file a motion to dismiss the charges. We need public help. We need people to tell the Attorney General that it's not appropriate. We need people to tell the agencies that you can't let these things occur and not address them. We need the governor to know that we can't give license to affecting our water resources for any of these types of projects. Now, the carbon dioxide pipeline's through a much different terrain, but it will face the same sorts of problems in these headwaters. You'll face the challenges of geology, the landscape, the interaction of the groundwater with the surface water, and it's permanent. We can see these things from space that are 50 years old. They don't go away. And that wasn't the promise we were made. Instead, we have swaths of trees cut for the pipeline. We have restoration projects that have come in and had to clear cut 20 acres of trees to restore the pipeline again with slash. And we see a repeated damage. We want no more damage. We want Enbridge to be accountable. We want the Corps of Engineers and state agencies to prevent these things from happening in the future.